Oh, thanks for coming out tonight, mate. It's kind of a big deal for me here.
Nah, man, I'm just so glad to see, you're getting into public talks now and everything like that. It's great to see your career blossoming. I just wouldn't pick this type of club to do a science talk at.
Yeah, it's all right, I guess. Like, we'll see what happens. I think I'm going to cover the topic of conservation. I feel like I know that.
Man, yeah. You are so passionate about that too. That's great.
I feel like I know about it too, so we'll see how it goes.
When are you on?
I think I'm coming up next. It can't be long now.
Next up, from Sydney, Australia, everybody welcome, it's Byrne Salamander!
Let's
Good
get to
luck,
it, dude.
All the best.
Thanks, man. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Woo!
I'm passionate conservationist, so I just want to ask, does anyone know what happens when you mix panda DNA with human DNA?
Oh no, he's not going to say this joke, is he?
You get banned from the zoo.
Yeah. Boo!
How hard this was to research and try and sound genuinely like I was doing work. I don't want Sci-gasm.
Howdy, you Byrne.
Howdy, Wade. Peace, man.
So
I'm taking the
what's
hippie
up with
angle
the piece?
today.
Yeah, I know. What's
Yeah, because we're talking about conservation.
Okay.
Saving the planet, saving the animals.
Captain Planet?
If you could save one animal, what do you think it would be?
Well, I could have saved one animal. Oh, look. I'd probably say the woolly mammoth, because that's an incredible creature.
Well, that's extinct, so you can't save that. So
Oh,
what
I
about-
thought you meant, sorry, no, throughout history, if I could save kind
fucking
of
T-Rex.
one,
Yeah,
yeah, if I could save kind of one
a
animal.
living animal. One
Living
that's
animal. If there's
may have
one
heard
that's
endangered.
it'd definitely be the panda.
Definitely be the
Like,
panda.
the only problem is, they're just not having enough sex. Like, they're just not mating enough.
They're actually going
just,
all right. China's
they?
really put some money into that, and they're starting to pump out
Oh, that's
pandas.
good. Also, tigers as well.
Tigers. Yeah, you're one of the root causes of the problems, my friend.
I know. Look,
I'll
I'm not
get to
looking.
that.
I'm just looking at it from I understand that there are certain animals that are in danger that don't get the funding. Because, yeah, I know that. But just at first glance, come on, man.
Yeah,
You're an
we'll get
animalist,
there. We're
man.
going to
Yeah.
talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Now, look, my background was in conservation, so I like to think a reasonably informed opinion on this sort of stuff. So I want to go through a few of the ideas and talk about the complications of conservation today.
Cool. Complications of conservation.
Yeah, it's got a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
It
The
does,
alliteration.
it
Yeah,
does,
that's
yeah.
the whole reason I did the episode. Is just so I could say that.
Well, good night.
Now, a lot of the ideas of conservation of certain species, plant and animal species, comes from this thing called the IUCN Red List. You heard of the IUCN Red List?
No, I have not. So, what does that stand for?
The IUCN stands for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or like some sort of French. So it's probably like International Union Conservation de Nature, something like that. I don't know. Something along those lines. But that's essentially what it's for. It's sort of like, IUPAC is the chemistry version. So it's sort of like that, but the biology version when they talk about species survival and biodiversity and that kind of things. Now, the Red List is a list of plant and animal species that are threatened. They could go into extinction. Now, the whole idea of writing this list is it works to prevent extinction by providing conservationists from around the world a list of target species which they can focus their efforts, their funding, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, the list is broken into, I'm sure you've heard of these categories. Vulnerable, which is like, ooh, they could be in a bit of trouble. Endangered, as in that basically says, yeah, look, these guys are running out, this is bad. And critically endangered is...
It's like you're fucked.
Yeah, this is pretty... You got to do something now or else these things are going to go extinct.
Okay.
Now, there are a whole lot of variety of reasons organisms end up in these categories. It could be the speed of decline, so it's not necessarily just the numbers. So it could be how quickly their population's fallen. That could put them in a category. Obviously, the population number will play a role as well. It could even be the reduction in the overall range of their habitat. So the numbers might still be sound, and they might not have declined, but their particular habitat has seen a significant decline.
And they predict flow-on effects.
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So they chuck them on the list as well. Now, the IUCN Red List is chosen based on scientists from all over the world, as well as advocates, moving through a certain list of criterions, assessments. But because of this, there are a lot of shortcomings in how they design this Red List. So, for example, if we don't actually have the data on a species, they're not going to make it onto the list. If we don't know what their population is, we don't know details on their habitat destruction, they're not going to make it on the list.
Yeah,
So
okay. That makes sense.
potentially a lot of species that should be there that just aren't. Now, it's an international union, so unfortunately, no matter what, there is going to be politics playing a role. So certain people in certain countries are going to say, no, this species deserves to be in it more than that species in that person's country. We'd like the funding sent over to us, please.
Yeah, well, I guess as well, even with kind of certain animals, if it's like a national animal, it's a native animal, and say if it's on the flag or it's on it has some sort of meaning to that population, then they're going to obviously want to preserve it, and they're going to want as much funding as they can to preserve it, because it's that kind of got to do with their national identity.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is one of the big problems. And in fact, there was a paper written in 2015 which included 19 conservation scientists, and many of those were IUCN members. And they highlighted the limits of the use of this red list model in conserving like ecosystems. Now, one of the problems they highlighted was the fact that politics played such a big role. So people who preferred certain plant and animal species or preferred certain ecosystems on that list, and they had greater influences, so they were more likely to get their results on list. And they were talking about refining their methods in how they determine which species should and should not go on a list. Now, I should stress, though, the IUCN Red List is still the best measure of biodiversity and conservation and the threatened nature of species around the world. It is a benchmark. It's used everywhere on every continent. Every country uses it, and that's what they sort of base their conservation efforts on.
Which is kind of interesting because, once again, that means that all these nations are kind of contributing or basing their funding on issues that they may not, or like, the issues that they may not be aware of aren't getting the funding that's needed.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And to be fair, how could you expect, say, a biologist from Russia to have an understanding of marsupial mammals in Australia? You can't.
No.
It's way too complex. Now, what we were talking about before, so you talking about saving the tiger or the panda, they have a specific name. We call them the charismatic animals or charismatic species.
I'm going to put it out there and say they get a lot more funding than other animals.
Yeah, they do. You can think of them as like the cool kids in the animal world, that everyone wants to like them, everyone wants to save them because, they're rad. So that's where the funding's going to go. So whether it's a private organization like the WWF, not the wrestling people, the Wildlife Fund.
They had to actually change their name because of them.
WWE, WWF, yeah. It's good. I'm glad the wrestling people changed the name and not the Wildlife Fund.
I think there was a bit of a
statement in our society.
Yeah, I think they wanted to keep WWF.
Yeah. World Wrestling Fund. Woo! No, we're
it's the World Wrestling
Pandas.
Federation. Oh, okay. World Wrestling Fund. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you meant I thought it's like, the World Wrestling Fund tried to. I'm like, what? It's a World Wrestling Federation.
I didn't know that. I was wrong. Yeah, I thought it was a World Wrestling Fund. Yeah.
What is World Wrestling Fund?
I don't know.
Well, like people donated to like Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yeah, how much money can Triple H really make? I'm sure their medical bills are quite high. Yeah.
Oh, the Macho Man Randy Savage needs your funding for a new table. Oh yeah.
That's really good.
Thanks, man.
Oh dear, but like some of these private,
who's going to afford those fireworks when
that's right.
Hulk Hogan comes out?
Fake blood is quite expensive, right? Now,
give generously.
Now, these private organisations that funding conservation, they need to attract people to give them money. So they're going to select species specifically. They're going to attract the most money. Okay, so these charismatic species are going to draw more money, and that's one of the big problems with saving nature. Is if you save one species, that might not actually do anything on the grander conservation scheme. If you're looking to save whole ecosystems or whole biomes, we have these things called keystone species, which is another topic, but. For example, it's way easier to find funds for things like the Bengal tiger or the pygmy elephant. And like imagine trying to find funds for the Bactrian camel or the hump-headed wrasfish.
They don't even sound cute.
No, that's what I mean. It's a bit of a difficulty. Now, all of those species are classified as endangered by the IUCN Red List, so they're all considered on the same level of risk. In fact, the hump-headed wrasse is a significant player in the aquatic ecosystems they live in. Now, so is the Bengal tiger, but the pygmy elephant to a certain extent. But the Bactrian camel, they are all, when you look at the ecosystems they live in, really key players in those ecosystems. But no one wants to send money. We've got to save the camels.
Let's save the camels, Save the camels' toes, And
this creates a problem with the idea. This is, one of the complications of conservation. I'm going to say that as many times as I can in this episode. God. So how do we get the money there and how do we get it going to the right place? And it becomes quite difficult for conservation scientists to organise and target their funding into the places it
Well,
needs to be.
especially like from the people who are working to kind of save, for instance, the tigers. Like they're going to want funding that comes into them to be given to their cause. Like they're going to want.
Absolutely.
They
have a responsibility.
They have a
ensure
responsibility to
it's
ensure
going to
the kind of that this animal is preserved and and is protected. Where say a small little kind of rodent type thing that isn't that appealing may need as much funding and plays a more vital role in the ecosystem. If that goes, then it's going to have more impact on the ecosystem than say a tiger or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real issue. It's how do we decide which animals even deserve to be on this list? What position are we in that we're like, that animal is probably not endangered compared to that one, so they're not going to go on the list.
We're pretty good at putting ourselves in that position.
Yeah, we are. We are definitely not an
We
endangered
are
species.
such dicks.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, we as a society, like, the humans, like, the way humans are, we're just such...
This is a general. There are good people out there.
There
but
are good people out there.
generally speaking.
But the majority, like, kind of decisions we make were, like, the big decisions. And, like, the reason why we're having to kind of, put so much effort into conservation is because we are such dicks that we keep fucking it up.
Yeah, that's right. The biggest cause of extinction is human activities.
Yeah, I know.
And
It's
that
just
saddens me.
look.
One
Now
species.
scientists are kind of thinking of putting us in having the Anthropocene era, which means that it's the era where humans are now having such an impact on the Earth that we're actually kind of thinking of getting our own timeline because we're such dicks.
We've changed the planet so much that it's because of us we can now attribute it to us as an individual species.
Oh, it's just the worst.
It is, and we're trying to fix it, which is good with these conservation measures, but we're still fucking it up because we oversimplify stuff. Like, I really like the stripes on that Bengal tiger. That seems badass. I'm going to send them $50. Camels, whatever. They just spit and hang out in the desert, right?
Yeah.
These guys don't even drink. How can you trust someone that doesn't drink?
Yeah, how can you trust like a camel toe?
That is definitely not attractive. Although it's not as bad as a moose knuckle, so...
Oh, I've never seen a moose knuckle.
It's a lot like a camel toe, just a lot bigger and rounder.
Oh, okay.
But look, another...
Get your head out of the gutters, listeners.
Yeah, that's right. That's your problem.
That's
not
your
ours.
Yeah, we're talking about camel toes here.
All right. Now, another measure of conservation that we use quite often to help preserve and conserve species is zoos. Okay, and you and I recently had a
Zeus,
visit
the
to a
Roman
zoo.
god.
Zeus?
No, the
Zeus?
Greek god.
No, zoo apostrophe s.
Oh, Zeus.
Zoos, the zoological parks.
Ah.
We had a recent visit to Taronga Zoo out
Yeah.
in Sydney, and yeah, it's a pretty neat day.
It
it's
is.
nice little arrangement, but zoos have their own problems to contend with. Now, let me go through a few of the pros of the zoos first. Okay, let's sing them their praises first.
Okay.
What zoos do that's really good?
Can I have a guess?
Yeah, shoot.
Sure. Okay. So obviously they may take in an animal that won't survive in its natural ecosystem, may have been neglected by its mother, whatever, and they put it in an environment that it will grow and live a life. They also, as well, provide certain amounts of funding by, obviously people walking through the door and people donating on top of that to, say, nice, beautiful tigers and stuff like that.
Yeah, awesome.
And they also provide awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then you've actually...
Did I get everything then?
You got almost everything, but pretty damn close, man. Not
thanks,
bad at all for a
dude.
physicist.
Thank
I'm
you.
thoroughly impressed. If I had a hat, I'd take it off.
That's all right.
Now, you said they
You can,
provide...
you can pull your pants down, you got a bit of camel toe going on.
Yeah, that's right. Just adjust them a bit. I've been sliding down. I'm going to keep going. It'll be a moose knuckle before long. Now, zoos actually provide massive amounts of funding for conservation efforts. And like you said, they also educate huge numbers of people. I know when I was a kid and I'd go to the zoo, I learned a lot about animals. Firstly, how big they are, what they look like. Interest is often sparked in young people going to zoos.
Absolutely.
And when I talk zoos, I'm not talking like a shitty zoo with a bunch of cages that, random animals live in. We're talking like a nice, well-organized zoo with conservation things in
So
place.
a zoo from the developed world.
Yeah, well, even some developed zoos are pretty crappy, to be honest.
they?
With concrete things. Yeah, you got to find a right zoo to a certain extent. Not all zoos are created equal. A lot of these zoos educate people about
Just
the
like
plight of
camel
endangered
toes.
animals.
Not all camel toes are equal.
Camel toes are equal. Not even close. Oh, geez. Some are more spread than others, depending on what their surface
Some are
they're on top of.
Some is just like, that is exactly what it looks like.
gross.
Come on.
But another thing which you talked about was taking in animals that are becoming close to extinction or can't survive in their habitat. But an area missed is breeding programs.
Damn it, yes.
Yeah, breeding programs are really good, and often zoos are in cooperation. They have sister zoos all over the world, and they'll exchange animals and share each other's D around. And breeding programs
You mean DNA or dick?
A bit of both. You know?
Share the D, yeah.
They share the D, and then like, I wonder whose job it is to actually, you know, jerk off some of the animals to send DNA around when it is not feasible to send animals around.
I know with horses they've got like stallions who will like get the female ready and do all the work and stuff like that, and then they just go and then chuck the male that they want to mate with them in. It's just like that would be the worst job as a horse in the world. That's what I've heard. Yeah,
I don't know. I reckon that wouldn't be a bad job as long as
get yourself worked up.
Well,
and then,
you know, they might have like the equivalent of a fluffer, someone who can finish you off there on the side. Maybe one of the hands. What are they called? Horse hands.
No. Then they get no. So once this is what I was told. Once again.
Who's working up the other horse originally as well? You know, the semen provider.
The worst job in the world, I reckon, to this day, would be like on an adult film, like and having to clean up the mess.
Oh, that would be pretty bad. I don't know if that'd be the worst job, but it'd certainly be up there.
Oh, come on, who's the worst?
I don't know. Cleaning up murder scenes would probably be a little bit worse.
No.
Especially some of those German films.
God.
Now, let's go back to zoos, okay?
Yes, how did we end up there?
That took a very quick turn, didn't it? That went very quickly.
We went to that dark place that's on some episodes ago. We were like right in there, like, quick, we've got to get ourselves out. Back to the conservation of
Vito
animals.
talking about camel toes. Why did I mention a fucking camel to you?
That's the worst thing you could have done.
Oh, dear. Now, zoos are actually bolster the declining population preserving of DNA of thousands of species around the world, and they can move them around. There are certain requirements of zoos, which mean they have to maintain a certain level of genetic diversity as well, so they can't just keep two animals, breed the offspring with the mother and things like that as well. There are requirements. Very few zoos, however, have or can actually support a large breeding program. They just simply don't have the space, or they don't have the facilities to care for the entire populations in a confined space, whether that's food or climate or anything like that. Now, the main issues to overcome with these breeding programs are, firstly, whether the species actually needs a breeding program, because if they're not endangered and they're, you know, in the wild going nuts, you don't really need to make more of them in the zoo. You're just making an increased captive population.
Yeah.
The second thing they have to talk about is the generation time. And there are snake species in North America in the zoo system, and they have a generation time of about 15 years. So that's quite a long program to actually work out an effective program when they're only breeding or have a turnover of every 15 years between a generation. The other things you have to take into account are the starting population size. So if you have an incredibly small population size, it might not actually be worth starting a breeding program because you simply don't have the genetic diversity to sustain it.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah, what do they do about species like, say, you know, like certain species that are in such low number that's just like you're done. Like, do you know the axolotl? There's no more. Isn't like the axolotl extinct or something like that?
Oh, I have no idea. There'd be a few of them around, but
yeah, I know but like in the wild, there's no. I think
so. They're all like in the pet trade now.
Yeah, I think so.
That maddens me a little bit.
Yeah.
And the other thing, like when we talked about generation times and starting populations, like how long do you continue a breeding program for? How long could it be feasible for? And with the snakes I was talking about before, from the same study, they suggest that these snakes, to have an effective breeding program, must continue for 100 years.
Oh.
So think about how many zookeepers are going to come through as snake caretakers. For this North American snake breeding program to be effective, it has to go on for 100 years.
Wow.
So that's a pretty long-sighted program to develop.
Yeah, and it would cost a lot of money too to kind of keep them in the confined space and make sure that, you know, with all the other things that come along
medication
with trying
a lot of health concerns when you have a high population density in a zoo too.
Absolutely.
So then the final point they have to think about, which we talked about and touched on, is the genetic variation. So you decide who can actually breed with who. Because if you've got a male, a brand new virile young man in a zoo, but it's the only...
So about the zookeepers or...
Yeah. Well, if it's the only young male from like a litter, no. From a litter of, say, 5 or 6 and all the others are female, you can't have him breeding with his sisters. So you need to work out a way for that male to either stay there and send all the females out or send that male out and bring a different male in to maintain that genetic diversity.
Also as well, a common misconception that some people have is that you can't like, you don't want inbreeding because, say, if a male and female in a litter have sex, then their babies are going to be retarded or something like that. That's not the case. It's actually, you just increase the risk of kind of rare genetic conditions. If you both have it, where if, mate with, say, a close family member, then although it's kind of, there's the religious aspect too, even though a lot of people don't follow it who are religious, but there's kind of that aspect of, you can't mate with your, a close family member because of, you may have a rare genetic condition that, say, 1 in 10,000 people have. Well, you've just significantly increased the risks of a child being born with that genetic condition.
Because you're a carrier.
Because you're a carrier, and so it's the other
sister
person.
/ cousin or whoever you're trying to breed with is also a character.
Sister / mother, yeah.
I'm sorry. Every time I say it, I'm like, who is thinking about it? Gee, my cousin's looking all right. Too bad we've got hemophilia in the family. Otherwise, that's pretty messed up. I'm looking at you, royal family. I'm looking at you. Like, what is wrong with you guys?
I don't know. I just don't know. There's a lot wrong.
Now,
they're worshipped.
There are a lot of success stories coming out of horse. And in my research, I found one. Hang on, let me get this right. The Shevlovsky horse, which was bred out of the Prague Zoo. And the Prague Zoo started a breeding program, which brought the world population from about 12 individuals to 700.
Wow.
So it did. It
Go
saved
Prague.
that species. Yeah, good on them. Now, this is back in I think it was obviously in a long program, but it started in the 80s or 70s and moved through into the 90s and 2000s, and it was quite a successful program. Another example was at the London Zoo, which looked at the Arabian oryx. Okay, now that helped bring the population from 8 to over 400 individuals.
Wow.
Pretty good, right? Pretty good. Now, the sad thing is, because they got 400 individuals, they were able to reintroduce them back into the wild and start them back on their, road to recovery in the natural ecosystem and things like that. But now, because they've had increased numbers, rates of poaching have gone up on this particular animal as well. And that sort of begs the question is, how often does reintroduction actually work? A lot of animals that are raised in captivity don't know how to survive on their own in the wild. They've always had to keep feeding them. So sometimes reintroduction doesn't actually work anyway. So a breeding program, even though it might be really effective, doesn't do anything for the species in nature because it doesn't know how to survive in its original habitat anymore.
That's really sad. But also, aren't there kind of areas that'll actually pay for people to go, where people can go in and actually hunt?
Great segue. Thank you, Wade.
No worries.
Yeah, that was my next point. Conservation hunting. Now, personally, we had a discussion about this just the other day.
Oh, actually. Actually, yeah, we did. It was interesting because we were talking about it, and I was discussing it with Byrne, the guy who's sitting next to me. Sorry. It's been
a long week, mate. It's been a long week.
Man. It's been a long week. So yeah, we were discussing it, and I was like, poaching. It's it's not poaching, but game hunting. A bunch of pricks, assholes, and I was like, actually, it's not a bad thing at the moment. It's probably one of the best options we have for helping to raise funds for the protection of wildlife.
Yeah, it is. It seems
I'm proving wrong again.
Counterintuitive, though, doesn't it?
It sucks. It was so hard for me to kind of deal with because I was like, but
personally, I can't see the appeal. I think we had that discussion. Neither of us can really see the appeal of hunting.
No, I can't. I can't see the appeal of hunting, and I can't see the appeal of killing something just for the joy of saying you've killed something. It's like you're an asshole. You're a fucking asshole.
I do have some friends from North America, and they hunt, but what they'll do is they'll go out and say they'll kill a stag or something like that, and then that will set them up for all of winter for their meat supply.
Absolutely, no,
I'm pretty down with that idea.
I will, if it's obviously.
I wouldn't do it. I don't think I could.
If it's,
I'd be that wuss with the gun. He'd be crying. Going, don't make me do it. I don't want to do it.
Baby. I just couldn't bring myself to shoot something. But however, I'm happy to have it on a plate in front of me, which is kind of very, it's like it's typical kind of. It's a bit.
It's the age we live in, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. It's like, I'm happy to have a big steak. Yeah, great. I love chicken and all that type of stuff. But I couldn't bring myself to kill something. It's just the mentality. It's the psychology of I have just killed this thing. And for some reason, I get some sort of disassociation from killing something if it's on my dinner plate and I get it in a package. But yeah, I found it really hard to kind of deal with the fact when I said to you.
But a lot of the animals like cows and chickens and things that you're killing aren't threatened species or anything.
No,
which
they're
is the
not.
other
No,
thing.
they're not threatened.
So a
species,
lot of these hunting is of threatened species. So it seems totally counterintuitive that you would go out and hunt an animal that is on the endangered red list, and somehow that's contributing to the species' survival.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, that doesn't seem to make sense.
Well,
but
it's because I guess it's just how much people are willing to pay for it. Like,
that's it. And there's a convention on the international trade in endangered species, or CITES, CITES, which allows 5 black rhino hunting permits in each of Namibia and South Africa each year. Now, that means that every year there are allowed to be 5 black rhinos killed in each of those countries. And in the year 2014, a permit, the first one sold outside of these countries, was sold to a Texan for $350,000 US to shoot 1 black rhino. That is a huge amount of money.
What a piece of shit.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of money.
It's huge money that would go really well, and it would obviously be attributed to kind of, like conservation efforts. I get that, but who would pay $350,000 to say, I killed an endangered species? Like, you are a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah, I don't tend to agree with them, but look, that becomes the argument of the ends justify the means, and are these people going to do it anyway? Does that money therefore go to the black market instead of at least back into conservation efforts?
I get that.
They're still a bit of a piece of shit.
But that doesn't stop me from calling them a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah, look, I don't know about those people. If you're a hunter and you enjoy it, or even if you've gone out and tried to shoot some of the big 5 in Africa, endangered species, we'd like to really know why and try to understand what the allure is to shooting those animals.
Please, even just someone just hunting for the fun of it. I'd love to receive an email or send us a message or something like that, just about why you do it, because currently we just can't see the point of it. I understand if there's numbers of, an animal are starting to affect the ecosystem and stuff like that, and the same,
cull or something.
Exactly, and they need to cull. Like, for instance, goats on the Galapagos Islands, like, they were introduced there. Now there's a culling program where they get these goats and they kind of shoot them, from helicopters. Like, I understand that. I really do, because you're protecting the greater it's for the greater good. But why you'd want to go there and shoot an endangered animal?
There's a number of papers I read, because the biggest one I had trouble coming to terms with was this whole hunting for conservation thing. And there was a paper that suggested that responsible hunters brought about $11 million into the Namibian economy in 2000. Wow. $11 million, which is huge for some of those African nations. There was another paper in 2005 which found that the reintroduction of responsible hunting practices encouraged landowners in South Africa to actually reintroduce species back onto their property. So they'd try and shoo them away so they could farm. But because hunting brought money in, they started to reintroduce these species back into it. And it led to an increase in the population of... let me make sure I'm getting the right animal here. Yeah, reintroduction of the white rhino from a population of less than 100 to over 11,000 species.
Wow, okay.
So this is not just that. There's been
11,000 animals, you mean, not species?
Oh, yeah, 11,000 animals. You're right. Beg your pardon. Thank you very much. Now, this isn't just like a single case. There's been cases in Zimbabwe where they've seen similar results observed in the elephant population. And I really should highlight there is a big distinction here between hunting, which is, looking for an animal and organising it, going through the right avenues, and just going out and poaching, which, is just fucked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Poaching is just horrible. And poaching is still a massive problem. Poaching kills far more animals than responsible hunting does too. So responsible hunting seems to be one of the better ways we can conserve animals and get rid of poachers, because people start to get upset at poachers killing all these animals because all of a sudden that animal is worth $250,000.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, and you might find as well, like the money put back into communities and stuff like that, and as well, like people kind of protecting these animals if they do see them, because they're worth so much to the community. That would be very beneficial. But I found it really hard to accept. I remember I was saying to you, because what actually brought this up was that Donald Trump had signed something
allowing trophies.
I think he's put it on hold now because of the backlash. But I remember, and I was discussing with you, and I shared the article. It was a BBC article, and I shared it. And it really kind of brought up some kind of good points that our listeners and followers kind of said, what about this, what about that? Or, no, that's wrong and that's right. No, here's why. And, some people were just like, America, Yeah. But others were like, well, it's actually beneficial because blah, 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 blah. So I had a really hard time accepting that. And I love that. I love that. It took me to a place
really
where I'm like,
this
can't be.
Well, I'll see if I can make you feel better about it. Okay. That. Now, there are a lot of critics of this hunting thing, and I tend to think of myself as one of them, and you are one of them as well. A lot of people argue that you can get just the same amount of satisfaction out of the hunt as you could if you just used a tranquilizer dart. Like, why do you have to kill that animal? Why couldn't you just hunt it, tranquilize it? And the other thing you can do is by tranquilizing, that gives vets an opportunity to actually go and assess the health of the animal too. So if you go out hunting and it's tranquilized and it's asleep, a vet can come along and go, all right, let's check the animal's health, whatever you need to do, virility, blah, 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 and they can examine the animal to get a better idea on the overall health. The animal wakes up, goes back to its life, and it can be, quote-unquote, hunted again later as well.
Yeah.
Now, that's just the hunting satisfaction angle.
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't think that's going to do it for these people. The reason why I think, and once again, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't one of the reasons why these people do what they do is for dominance?
Oh, it could be. I don't know. You'd have to go into the psychology of hunters there. I don't know. Yeah, I'm more of a submissive, to be honest.
Oh, yes, you are.
As from our episode on fetish and kink, we found out. Yeah. Make sure you check that one out. That was a fun one. Yeah. Now, the alternative, because hunting brings in a lot of money, a really common argument, and an argument that I've had with members of my family is like, why do we need to raise money through hunting when ecotourism can raise just as much money, if not more? And ecotourism is really responsible for the saviour of a lot of animals. For example, gorillas throughout Rwanda, Uganda, and the Congo have actually stimulated about $75 million over 7 years, and that made up about 90% of those countries' foreign incomes earnings. Just ecotourism to see gorillas.
I guess one of the things is as well that you risk, and once again, I'm speaking from a very ignorant point of view, but wouldn't then you risk of kind of major companies coming in, like building a Hilton, say, in one of these countries, like Namibia or something like that, and all of a sudden, all the tourism money goes into that building and then back to the US again.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, wouldn't, one need to make sure that money goes directly back to the community? Because if it's with the community and stays in the community, then you kind of will get people more actively involved. I know ecotourism is one of the things that they're trying to bring into the Galapagos, for example.
It does. It gets really complicated. Then you hire locals who you're going to hire to staff all these.
Well, do you remember Lonesome George?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was. He was threatened. Some of the locals were going to kill Lonesome George. Like, they threatened to kill Lonesome George, and it had to be under guard, or watching guard for towards the end of its life, because the locals were getting so upset with their kind of fishing and their general kind of living being so affected by ecotourism. But what they're trying to do in the Galapagos now is they're trying to educate educate the local population. For instance, boats that used to go out fishing now can be boats that take out tourists and show them around the island and good spots and where there are a lot of this type of fish and that or whatever. And so they're trying to train up the local community in the Galapagos to actually accept tourism and then benefit from that, because it goes back into the community, and they will be more likely, and one would think, would want to preserve the Galapagos Islands.
Absolutely. And that's I think you hit the nail on the head there. Ecotourism, one of the downfalls of it is the amount of people it brings. So if you can consider how many people are coming into an ecosystem, that's going to involve a greater amount of environmental management to ensure it is sustainable. It also means that, like, an individual tour group, for example, will far outweigh a hunting group, but per capita it's going to generate far less income as well. So an individual who's paying $300,000 to go and shoot an animal is far less than, to get that same sort of benefit, you have to get 30 individuals all paying $10,000 each, 30 to 1. There is a bit of a difference, which really does highlight the whole point of this episode, is how complicated conservation science actually is.
So many variables to it. There's just so many different kind of variables and so many different outcomes as well. Like, you protect this, then that happens, but then you've also got this problem as well, because the ecosystem's so complex, and to just kind of think that's a one-size-fits-all is just such a wrong way of looking at it. If we protect the tigers and the pandas, then that's great. That's going to make it, everything better. It's like, no, there's animals that aren't appealing. There are insects that play an important role that are now going extinct because of, say, something like climate change. It's not just poaching. It's the overall kind of their ecosystems are now changing, and it's not changing at a rate which they're able to evolve and adapt. And that's one of the things that some people don't understand is that the changes in climate and the variations in weather and stuff like that, they're becoming faster and more extreme.
Yep.
Which means that we are less likely to adapt to those kind of changes. And so, cities that, for instance, if with sea level rise, cities that were once, on the coastline, in a few years are going to have big problems with water surges and things like that. We can't just kind of build our cities, pick up a city and move it 2 kilometers back inland. The climate and the effects of human activity is changing our globe faster than we will be able to adapt. That's what scares scientists.
Yeah, and one of the main reasons we see for extinction is habitat loss and habitat destruction. So if we're talking conservation, every little thing you can do helps. If you try and minimize your impact specifically on how much habitat you require, or I suppose you call it your eco footprint, that's going to do a world of good for a number of species, rather than just going, I like the Bengal tiger, I'm going to chuck $50 to that fund.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there is hope out there.
Once again,
we are getting better.
Don't not donate to the preservations of tigers and things like that. If every bit of money counts, no matter where it's spent. But just have that in mind, when it comes time to donate money. Is it better off going to this, or is it better off going to this thing, this cause as a whole?
That's right. There's some really good causes to donate to. And on
please don't stop us. You donating to kind of tiger, Bengal tiger.
And on that note, I'd like to mention to all of our listeners that we do have a Patreon account.
Patreon.com/Sci-gasm podcast.
Yeah, make sure you get on that. And for as little as $1 or $2, you can get access to exclusive content.
You can. Where we take you to the dark places of the web. And there's no going back after you've seen some of the videos that you can come across. And we review them for you.
Yeah, that's right. We'll have a good look. We'll do it for you. That's if you've got some spare cash after donating to some of those conservation funds or saving the planet.
That's
one step at a time, people.
One step at a time. But thank you for all our listens each week. We get thousands of listens each week. We love you guys so much. Thank you. If you have any episode suggestions, please send it through. And please, support all these causes and support Sci-gasm podcast. Don't forget that.
That's also
Thanks,
important.
guys.